Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Ballabha Girivadadhari Gopijana Ballabha Girivadadhari Jasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Tarine. Morning. Hare Krishna. We're in the 7th canto. And we're reading in the 4th chapter of the 7th canto, text 40. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nadati kvachit utkanta, nadati kvachit utkanta, vilajo nrityati kvachit, vilajo nrityati kvachit, kvachit tad bhavana yuktas, kvachit tad bhavana yuktas, tanmayo nuchakaraha. Nadati kvachirutkanto Vilajo nrityati kvachit Kvachit tadbhavana yuktas Tanmayo nuchakaraha Nadati kvachirutkanto Vilajo nrityati kvachit Kvachit tadbhavana yuktas Tanmayo nuchakaraha Nadati kvachit utkanto Vilajo nrityati kvachit Bhavana yuktas Tanmayo nuchakaraha Nadati kvachit utkanto Vilajo nrityati kvachit Kvachit tadbhavana yuktas Tanmayo nuchakaraha Nadati exclaims loudly, and then in parentheses, addressing the Lord, O Krishna. Kvachit, sometimes. Utkantaha, being anxious. Vilaja, without shame. Nrityati, he dances. Kvachit, sometimes. Kvachit, sometimes. Tatmaya, tatbhavana, with thoughts of Krishna. Yukta, being absorbed. Tatmaya, thinking as if he had become Krishna. Anuchakara, imitated. Ha, indeed. Translation: sometimes, upon seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prahlad Maharaj would loudly call in full anxiety. He sometimes lost his shyness in jubilation and began dancing in ecstasy. And sometimes, being fully absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, he felt oneness and imitated the pastimes of the Lord. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Prahlad Maharaj sometimes felt that the Lord was far away from him and therefore called him loudly. When he saw that the Lord was before him, he was fully jubilant. Sometimes, thinking himself one with the Supreme, he imitated the Lord's pastimes, and in separation from the Lord, he would sometimes show symptoms of madness. These feelings of a devotee would not be appreciated by impersonalists. One must go further and further into spiritual understanding. The first realization is impersonal Brahman, but one must go still further to realize Paramatma and eventually the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is worshipped by the transcendental feelings of a devotee in a relationship of Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, or Madhurya. Here the feelings of Prahlad Maharaj were in the mellow of Vatsalya, filial love and affection. As a child cries when left by his mother, when Prahlad Maharaj felt that the Lord was away from him, he began to cry, nadati. Again, a devotee like Prahlad sometimes sees that the Lord is coming from a long distance to pacify him, like a mother responding to a child, saying, "My dear child, do not cry, I am coming." Then the devotee, without being ashamed, due to his surroundings and circumstances, begins to dance, thinking, "Here is my Lord is coming." Thus the devotee in full ecstasy sometimes imitates the pastimes of the Lord just as the cowherd boys used to imitate the behavior of the jungle animals. However, he does not actually become the Lord. Prahlad Maharaj achieved the spiritual ecstasies described herein by his advancement in spiritual understanding. So the translation again, sometimes upon seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prahlad Maharaj would loudly call in full anxiety. He sometimes lost his shyness in jubilation and began dancing in ecstasy. And sometimes, being fully absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, he felt oneness and imitated the pastimes of the Lord. Wow. This is very advanced stuff here. When you're asked to give a Bhagavatam class, you never know what you're going to get. And sometimes it's basic philosophy, sometimes it's pastime, sometimes it's something that there's so much purport that you really just have to read and say any questions. And then occasionally you get a curveball like this one, where we're called upon to describe things that we have absolutely no understanding of. I mean, the ecstasies of Prahlad Maharaj and his pure love of Krishna. Who can understand the depth of such love? It's way beyond our understanding. Sometimes we may get a little bit of a hint of what it's like, because by their mercy the acharyas will give us commentaries that provide examples. Here, for example, it's described like a mother responding to a child, so Prahlad Maharaj is calling out like a child to a mother. Of course, that's not meant to be taken completely. It's not a material mother and child relationship, but it's an example. It's something to give us some kind of entry into understanding these things. And it is possible. It's possible to get some glimmer of appreciation for what such ecstatic love is all about, because it's inherent to the soul. This isn't something so foreign to us that we have no hope of understanding it. The soul is by nature ecstatic. In fact, the three levels of realization are described here: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In the Brahman stage of realization, we get an intimation of immortality. There's some sense of, I'm not this body, I'm an eternal soul in Brahman realization. Paramatma realization conveys an additional dimension of the chit, or full knowledge of the nature of the soul and the Supreme Soul and our relationship to the universe. And there's some deeper dimension. But it's only in Bhagavan realization that we can know ecstasy. Ecstasy is not something that can be actually understood outside of a personal relationship. Ecstasy means people. There's no ecstasy without people. You can appreciate the sky, you can appreciate a piece of music. Real ecstasy is something that takes place in a relationship between individuals. So that's the nature of the soul, and that is our nature. We are by nature Satchidananda Vigraha. We have that quality within us, but it's covered right now. So what's happening through our chanting process, and it all begins with chanting, is that those original qualities of the soul, including the ecstasy of the soul, are gradually being reawakened. I found this lovely verse. Did my homework for this one. From the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 11:240. By chanting the holy name of the Supreme Lord, one comes to the stage of love of Godhead. Then the devotee is fixed in his vow as an eternal servant of the Lord, and he gradually becomes very much attached to a particular name and form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, As his heart melts with ecstatic love, he laughs very loudly or cries or shouts. Sometimes he sings and dances like a madman, for he is indifferent to public opinion. It's very much like the verse we're reading today about Prahlad Maharaj. Says he became indifferent to his surroundings. In that ecstasy, you lose your sense of propriety. You know, the quality of love is such that in its higher stages, you don't really care what people think of you. You know, like, are they thinking I'm crazy, dancing and singing? Like, there's no such consideration. You're just absorbed in that loving mood. But we can't really understand these things. We can discuss them and we can read about it. I remember when I first joined Krishna consciousness back in London in 1969, and the Krishna book had just come out. So we're reading these ecstasies of the devotees and the different rasas and so on. And there was one fellow there who went by the name Jagannath. I don't think he was actually initiated, but he gave himself the name Jagannath. He had been a gunner in Vietnam, machine gunner, so a bit traumatized. And so he was always, you know, crotchety, you know, just always objecting to something about Krishna consciousness, but he couldn't go away. He couldn't give it up. You know, Krishna consciousness is sometimes described as hot sugarcane juice. You know, it's too sweet to give up and too hot to handle. So he was kind of like that with Krishna consciousness. Just couldn't give it up, but he was always... I remember one Ishtagosti. We used to have these things called Ishtagostis. We'd sit down once a week and we'd talk about, well, what about this? Or what does that verse mean? Or what do we do about this? And so I remember one Ishtagosti, Jagannath, we were talking about the cowherd boys. And, you know, he just slammed his fist down on the floor and he said, all right, I'll stay in Krishna consciousness, but one thing I refuse is to herd cows for all of eternity. I'm not going to do it. You know, it's like, you know, we have these images of what ecstasy, that I'm not going to do that, I just refuse to do that. I had a student at Hofstra University. We were talking about the Bhagavad Gita and Arjuna's dilemma, and this young lady put up her hand and said, oh, I totally get where Arjuna is coming from. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do after college either. You know, so we don't really understand what ecstasy looks like. You know, we're judging it by our material experiences. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj gives the example of the bargeman. You know the story of the bargeman. His job is pulling a barge up and down the side of a river. And he's a poor guy that can't even afford a pair of shoes. So as he's pulling this barge, he's cutting his feet on the brambles and the sharp stones along the edge of the riverbank. And he's dreaming of the day. Someday I'll be rich. And when I'm rich, I'm going to line this riverbank with quilts and pillows and mattresses so that as I'm tugging my barge, I'll never cut my feet again. Without realizing that if he's that rich, you know, that he can afford to line a riverbank with quilts, he'll never have to pull that stupid barge again. But he's projecting his material situation into a position of transcendence which he doesn't understand, or in this case, wealth. So we're a little bit like that. We're just on the edge of the ocean of this ecstasy of Krishna consciousness. I remember one letter that I got from Srila Prabhupada. Back in those days, you could actually write Prabhupada a letter and he would respond to you. We're talking 1970, 71. And so I wrote this letter to Prabhupada, and it was, you know, I was 21 years old, you know, and kind of in the enthusiasm of youth or whatever. I don't quite remember what it was that I'd said to him. Yeah, thank you. And he wrote back saying, you're very enthusiastic. I said, and because you're so enthusiastic, you will go back to Godhead very soon, very shortly. And then his next line was the real payoff. He said, but now go on. They said, Krishna consciousness is like someone swimming in the ocean and never finding any end to it. So we're just kind of dangling our toes in that ocean of transcendence. We haven't really got a sense of it yet. It's vast. It's vast. And these ecstasies of love of God go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. A couple of other stories about Srila Prabhupada. That's what I like best, is sharing stories about Prabhupada. So I remember being in his room in Paris and asking him, I said, well, if the highest ecstasy is the ecstasy of the gopis, then why would anybody want to be anything else? Why would anybody want to be a blade of grass or a cow or, cowherd boy or, parent? Why would, I mean, you're always telling us, I said, you're always telling us that the love of the gopis is the highest. And so why would someone want to be in some other relationship with Krishna? And he said, ultimately it comes down to a question of personal choice. That's a very interesting, we'd have a whole class just on that one response. He said, but what does it matter? He says, in the spiritual world, if you're a small glass or a big glass, when you're full, you're full. Isn't that nice? So in one sense, the gopis' ecstasy may be higher than, the cow's ecstasy or whatever, but that's a material calculation to think, well, that's better, I want that, I don't want. That's all a very material calculation. So then I think it was at the same occasion I said, but you keep saying that. You keep saying that the gopis, in all of your books, in all your lectures, the gopis. Should we, is that what you want for us? I mean, should we try to love Krishna like a gopi? It's a very controversial topic. And he said, his answer was great. He said, oh, well, that's very nice if you want to do that. He said, but you have to be completely free of all material attachment. He said, so for now, you should read our books. And he specifically mentioned, he said, read Chaitanya Charitamrita and read Chaitanya Bhagavat. Now, he had not translated Chaitanya Bhagavat. But he recommended, you should read these books. That's yet another class we'll have sometime. So the point being that we don't really understand these things. They're way over our heads. And especially when we look at the life of a pure devotee like Prahlad Maharaj. I mean, he's 5 years old. He's 5 years old. All right, now, either you read Bhagavatam as some kind of literary, metaphorical work, right, that's just meant to kind of put good wisdom out there into the world, in which case these things don't really matter, or you take it seriously as literal history about real people, in which case we're compelled to ask, how does a 5-year-old know such depth of ecstatic love of God? How is that possible? Then it's a different kind of conversation. We know, for example, that Prahlad benefited from having Narada Muni as his spiritual master. I mean, that's the great blessing of a bona fide spiritual master, is that no matter where you are in life, he can quickly take you. It's like latching onto a fast-moving vehicle. He can take you to love of God in this one lifetime. But we know that that age matters. There are, for example, when you study the story of the Kumaras, one reason why the Kumaras cursed Jai and Vijay, the gatekeepers in Vaikuntha, was that they wanted to remain pure, so they voluntarily, as mystic yogis, stayed in the bodies of young children. But they also had the psychology of young children. And as young children, they took offense that Jai and Vijay had not recognized who they were and didn't let them immediately into the palace. So it was a childish response. So these things are deserving of discussion. That on the one hand, someone can be such an elevated devotee and yet also, according to circumstances, be a part of their environment, their time, their stage in life, and so on. We have a devotee godbrother, Radhika Raman, Ravi Gupta. Brilliant. He earned his PhD at age 20. I met him recently down in Gainesville. We had a science conference down there. Murli was one of our featured speakers down there. And I had a chance to talk, in the hallway, just kind of grabbed Radhika for a few minutes and got to talk to them about the Goswamis and specifically about Jiva Goswami. Brilliant. Command of the topic is absolutely breathtaking, right? And at such a young age. So there are many kinds of ecstasies, and we come to understand these things at different stages in our spiritual advancement. There are ecstasies in anger, there are ecstasies in despair, and it gets very complicated. I mean, I want to just read one quick passage here from Nectar of Devotion. If you really want to know about ecstasy and Krishna consciousness, this is the book to read. This is from chapter 32, Symptoms of Continuous Ecstasy. Now, just to give you an idea of how complicated this gets. The continuous ecstasy of love can remain like a powerful king, subduing all temporary manifestations of love as well as any opposing elements of anger. It can be exhibited directly or indirectly, and thus ecstatic love can be described as direct or indirect. These symptoms of ecstatic love are possible only when one is fully situated in a transcendental position. Direct ecstatic love can be divided into two groups, namely selfish and selfless. When non-contradictory symptoms of ecstatic love are distinctly manifest, any contradictory symptoms create a sense of abomination. Contradictory ecstatic love is called selfish. That ecstatic love which can adjust all contradictory or non-contradictory symptoms is called direct selfless love. These selfless symptoms can again be divided into 5 groups: neutrality, servitude, fraternity, parenthood, and conjugal love. Such ecstatic love assumes a particular mode in contact with different objects of love. All right, and that's the opening paragraph of this chapter. So it's a detailed course of study, and the good news is that we Gaudiya Vaishnavas are ultimately a lineage of poets and artists. And so a lot of what we understand comes from song and poetry. And that makes things a little bit easier. I took the liberty of bringing a couple of poems here. Here's one that describes ecstatic love in anger. This is Radharani, a poem by Chandidas. Radharani is speaking to her friend, and she says, "My mind is not on housework. Now I weep, now I laugh at the world's censure. He draws me out to become an outcast, a hermit woman in the woods. He has bereft me of parents, brothers, sisters, my good name. His flute took my heart. His flute, a thin bamboo trap enclosing me. A cheap bamboo flute was Radha's ruin. That hollow, simple stick fed nectar by his lips, but issuing poison. If you should find a clump of jointed reeds, pull off their branches, tear them up by the roots, throw them into the sea." And now we have this little section at the end of devotional poems where the poet steps in. Right? So Chandidas says, "Why the bamboo? Not it, but Krishna enthralls you. Him you cannot uproot." And just one more poem, and then we can open this up for some discussion. Here Here's Ecstatic Love in Despair. I love this poem. It's a prayer to Krishna by Vidyapati. He prays children, spouse, friend, drops of water on heated sand. I spent myself on them, forgetting you. What are they to me now, O Madhava, now that I am old and without hope, apart from you? But you are the Savior of the world and full of mercy. Half my life I passed in sleep, my youth, now my old age. How much time? I spent my youth in lust and dissipation. I had no time to worship you. Ageless gods have come and passed away. Born from you, they enter you again like waves into the sea. For you have no beginning and no end. Now at the end, I fear the messengers of death. Apart from you, there is no way. I call you, Lord, the infinite and finite, my salvation. So here, this is, a very elevated Vaishnava, but he laments that I've wasted my life in it. I've denied myself the ecstasy of serving you. So, anyway, that's about as much as I can pack into a half hour on the subject of ecstasy and Krishna consciousness. Maybe you have some questions or comments you'd like to add. Yes, Prabhu.
In that last poem you read by Vidyapati, so moving, it's almost as if implicitly he's saying that perforce we have to attend to things that seem to be contradictory to our devotional service, like caring for our children, caring for our elders, caring for the people of the world. We must do those things because it's incumbent upon us as Vaishnavas, because of the compassion that Krishna wants the devotion spread in the world. And yet it seems like, oh, I don't want to do this. I just want to be with you. Mm-hmm. It seems implicit that.
Yes, that's Krishna's trick for stimulating our ecstatic love for him, is that sometimes he'll keep himself removed or aloof from us so that we'll desire him more. He told that to the gopis in the chapters in 10th canto about the rasa dance. They were very angry at him for having disappeared, So when they found him by the banks of the Yamuna River and they, started making nice, massaging his legs or whatever, but they were fuming. And so kind of in a backhanded way, they said, so Krishna, what do you think of somebody who's just completely loved by somebody else but turns his back on them? Krishna says, I know what you're talking about. I know you're angry with me. But I did that on purpose. He said, if I just show up every time you call me, then our love is cheap. You deserve better than that. It's, I think, the nature of Krishna consciousness that there's always going to be some frustration. And if it's handled in the right way, it's an impetus to ecstatic love. Prabhupada quoted this, so it's a mundane example, but Prabhupada quoted, he says that the prostitute Chintamani once advised that frustration leads to the greatest ecstasy. We won't go into that, but you get the idea. That sometimes Krishna's not quite within our grasp, but we yearn more and more. That yearning, that the Sanskrit is lolyam, that sentiment of yearning, of, oh, I have to have Krishna now. Lolyam. It's an important quality.
Thank you.
think the four Kumaras acted according to the psychology. They took the offenses. So, I mean, but at the same time we see that Prahlad Maharaj never had the impetus to play games and all that thing. So, what is right exactly? I mean, like, how do I demark it? Okay, it's fine, it's psychology. That's his nature. But at the same time, this person who is advanced in Krishna consciousness, but then he doesn't like to waste time in playing. But at the same time, if somebody likes to play, should we take it that he's doing something wrong? There's something wrong with him?
I'm not quite sure I understood the question.
I'm saying, you said that four Kumaras acted according to the psychology they had of a child. They took that offense.
And Prahlad seems to be more advanced than that?
Yeah,
So how do we
because
understand?
though he is a small child, but he's not interested in playing. So somewhere, I mean, like, I feel like somewhere the psychology is there. Okay, it's fine. We understand that that's what's his psychology, and we just...
Of course, we say nothing against the core four Kumaras who were such elevated devotees. I mean, who can travel like they can to the spiritual realm, at will to see Lord Vishnu? But Prahlad Maharaj is an exceptional devotee. He's a Mahajan, and Prabhupada used to tell stories about Prahlad's story all the time. From the womb, he was hearing about Krishna's glories from his spiritual master. His mother took shelter of Narada Muni, and she was learning from him. And so he was self-realized before birth, even. And we know that he wasn't interested in playing like a 5-year-old child. When he was in school, he told his classmates, you better carve out some time for Krishna here, and it's natural that you want to, we're young kids and we like to play, but, we're going to spend half our life sleeping and another quarter of our life in childhood, and what's going to be left, What is it? Komara Acharam Pragya. Right? He said, so think about it. We have university preaching programs. He had grammar school preaching program. And maybe the first grammar school preaching program. Yeah. Very advanced soul. And here we're reading how much ecstasy he was experiencing. So who can understand the glories of Prahlad Maharaj? Yeah. Ultimately, even though we all are subject to our psychology, if you will, our background and upbringing, the state of Krishna consciousness is a transcendental position. It transcends those material circumstances. I kind of go back and forth on this myself, because on the one hand, I very much believe that we should understand why we behave the way we do. I believe in therapy. I asked Prabhupada about therapy. I truly believe that there's much to be gained by understanding what it is that has brought us. Why is it that some people become child abusers? They're wearing kunti mala and they're child abusers. How do we understand such a thing? How do we understand that someone may be so learned in Shastra, worshipping the deity, and yet they're abusing their wife? And how do we understand? How can these two things coexist in the same person? So I think it's important that we examine ourselves and understand where something may come from. And yet at the same time, we know that chanting Hare Krishna has a purifying effect. And it is perfect and complete in itself. Eventually the chanting will bring someone to the transcendental platform. For me, my conviction is that if that is true, then perhaps one sign that you are chanting effectively is that you will go find some therapy. That's myself. I can't point to a chapter and verse and tell you that. But I think that if we come to a place where we're truly sincere, then we'll want to make further progress. I have this habit, I have this inclination. I really want to figure this out. Why am I stuck in this? And you will take steps to rectify that, to understand it and move on. So I don't see that there's any contradiction there. This was a big topic, actually, wasn't it, Murli, in Gainesville? What is the interface between matter and spirit? I mean, matter is matter. The soul is the soul. How do these things correspond? How do they communicate? You know, what's the software? You know, what's the interface between matter and spirit? As best I can understand, it's faith. There was one person at the conference who was saying it's microtubules. Microtubules are elements in the brain that are down smaller than the cellular level, and they're transmitters of proteins. And then when there is some action in the brain, you see spikes if you track the behavior of these microtubules. Personally, I think that the interface between matter and spirit is faith. That when we're sincere, then Krishna intervenes and we can make spiritual progress. So it's when we deserve that progress that it comes to us. Yeah.
Could you share the question that you asked Prabhupada about therapy and what his answer was?
This was in his room in Paris. And before becoming a devotee, I had some therapy. After I left Temple Life, I had some therapy too. You know, what's the first thing you do after you leave Temple Life? And go find a therapist. What was I thinking? So I asked him, I said, you know, what's your opinion of psychiatry, therapy, psychoanalysis? He said, I have some, it has some value, he says, but not ultimate value. He says, he gave the example of his own son. I said, one of my children, I had a son who came home from college, and he tapped his forehead and said he wasn't right in the head. So he said at the time, I sent him, in Calcutta, there were two halves to the hospital. There was the British wing and the Hindu wing. I said, I paid a lot of money to send my son to see a therapist in the British wing of the hospital. And for a while, he said he was better. He was home and he was better. Then one day he said he left home and I never saw him again. We know about that son. He died estranged from his family. So, you know, Prabhupada was something for everything. He didn't reject anything out of hand. Everything is Krishna's energy. Everything has some place in devotional service. It just has to be approached carefully. You know, I asked him, what did he think about rock and roll? You know, this was at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, and there was a soiree indienne, you know, going on in the backyard, and there was this rock band out there, you know, jamming. And the music was coming, the noise, the music, whatever, was coming right in Prabhupada's window. And I asked him, I said, is this okay with you? So he got up, and he went to the window, he looked out, he has his hand in his bead bag, he's chanting. He's saying, are they going to chant Hare Krishna? I said, I think that's the idea, was, you know, to attract the crowd with the rock and roll and then get everyone chanting. He said, oh, then it's okay. I said, but I don't understand why you say it's okay. Just a few months ago, you shut down the Traveling Roadshow. There used to be something called the Traveling Roadshow, which was buses that went out and they had a fold-out stage and they had, you know, electric instruments and guitars, and they put on shows on college campuses, and Prabhupada stopped it. I said, well, why did you stop the Traveling Roadshow? He said, oh, no, that I stopped because it wasn't being well managed. So he was someone for everything. You know, as long as it was being properly managed, as long as it did not interfere with devotional practices, he was fine with that. We were fanatics. He wasn't a fanatic. I think that's the end of the class. Yeah. All right. You have a question?
Yeah. What is the proportion between our effort when we take to so-called like things like therapy and other so-called somewhat material stuff in order to, please Krishna and make advancement? And so between that and Krishna's mercy, how do we make advancement, by that or by Krishna's mercy? And if it's both, what's the correlation?
Matter is spirit covered by forgetfulness. Matter engaged for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead regains its lost spiritual qualities. It's only material as long as you're seeing it material. If it's engaged for the purpose of pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, what's material about that? Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Yeah.
We bow down low to the great Lord of our hearts. By His grace, one can cross the ocean of cruel suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from His lotus mouth. Attaching to His lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes, which fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From Him ecstatic praying emanates. By Him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of His character. Our spiritual master, the ocean of mercy, and of the poor, Lord and master of the devotees. Majesty, merciful unto us. Give us the shade of Your lotus feet. Be famous and spread all over the world. The King shall show His presence.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Guru Charana Padma Devalabha Gati Sadma Shri Guru